So we have come to the golden age of Israel. In the Israelite culture, there were prophets who God called to speak to kings. But there also emerged during this golden age wise teachers, sages, people who would bring incredible emotional intelligence and clarity and wisdom concerning everyday life, life lived as it actually is. During the time of the kings, maybe around David and Solomon or maybe later, an Israelite sage writes this extraordinary poem, one of the greatest poems in ancient Middle Eastern literature, about a man who suffered extraordinarily called Job. The question that this particular writer of Job is addressing is, why do extraordinarily righteous people suffer? He sets this man, Job, in the time of the patriarchs, where wealth was measured in livestock. But we are writing from the position of a people who knew the Torah given at Sinai, something Job would not have been aware of. And we see that he is extraordinarily righteous. He worships or gives honour to Elohim as he understands him. So every time his children have a feast, he will offer sacrifices to Elohim to make sure that he is in right relationship with the Creator. In the area of work, he is just and fair and blameless. He goes above and beyond. He is the defender of the poor and the needy. He is upright in every way and a voice of justice for the oppressed, a defender of the fatherless and the widow. And he also has made a covenant with his eyes not to look lustfully at any other woman. So in regards to the Torah, he is not just fulfilling the requirements, but he is blameless. He goes above and beyond. He is truly a righteous man. He loses all his wealth, all his children. He suffers in his body terribly with sickness, and he almost loses his life. His so-called comforters, as they have come to be known, come along. They are, from the Israelite writers' and readers' perspective, aware of this dynamic. When you obey covenant, then blessings come in the form of protection, provision and identity. But when anyone violates covenant, then curses come in the form of sickness, poverty and death. And it looks like Job has triggered curses. Every area of his life looks cursed, according to the understanding of the law given at Sinai. So they cannot believe he hasn't sinned. They interrogate him in all sorts of ways, ask him questions, and he is adamant, I am blameless, I've done nothing wrong. I don't understand this, but I've done nothing wrong. But they cannot accept that answer. They cannot make peace with the fact that he would be in such traumatic suffering and not have sinned. Finally, at the end of this horrendous period, God speaks to Job, and something beautiful happens in their relationship where Job says, I'd heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. He breaks through into an intimacy with God through this suffering, and everything in his life is restored to greater prosperity and blessing than before. But what he doesn't know in the story, or his comforters, none of them ever find out, is what the writer brings to the narrative and brings this reframing of suffering. We've touched on it in Genesis when we've looked at this crafty creature who tries to deceive and bring this wedge between humanity and God. And we've looked at it briefly in Esther when we see there are spiritual dynamics, there are principalities and powers behind human political kingdoms and cultures. But at the beginning of this narrative, the writer brings in an insight that so far we have not seen in the Hebrew scriptures. A whole divine council, whole group of beings in the presence of God, including this being the Satan, the accuser, the slanderer, the adversary. And he brings his accusation to God. This man is only completely righteous and blameless because you bless him. If you didn't bless him, if everything was taken away from him, he would not be a righteous man. So he's actually not righteous, he's fundamentally self-seeking. He's only worshipping you and doing the right thing because he knows you bless him. And God will not hear a slander against humanity. He will not hear it. And so he says, that's not true. That is not true of my servant Job. He is pure and blameless and upright because that's who he is. not for anything I give him. He just is like that. And he gives the Satan permission within limitations to take away his blessings. There's a divine boundary on the two activities of Satan. Firstly, he's not to touch Job himself, and then he is to touch Job's health but not take his life. And then we see in the material realm what that looks like. So what we can see here is there is not only in the unseen realm a slanderer or an accuser, as we saw in Genesis, seeking to bring a wedge between God and humanity, but this slanderer, this accuser, this adversary is able to wreak havoc in the material realm. This adversary is able to bring poverty, sickness, and death. This would have been a radical reframing for the Israelite community. There are two comforts in this story. Firstly, through this extraordinary suffering, Job met God in a way he didn't know him before. He knew about him, but when he went through this suffering and God spoke to him, he met him in a way that he had never met him before. The righteous will never be left unvindicated. And we see that Job, although he does go through suffering for a time, ultimately at the end of his life, the blessings and prosperity are greater than they were before. These sages, these writers, these speakers of wisdom, these teachers around the time of the Golden Age of Israel and throughout the time of the kings speak of one who is to come, the wisest teacher humanity will ever know, the most emotionally intelligent man who has ever lived.